Hey, everybody, this is Andy Hall, and you're watching and possibly listening to the Naked Diner podcast. With me, as always, is my co-host, Jack Maturko. How
I'm
you doing,
doing
Jack?
well, Andy. How are you?
Can you imagine that this is our number 168th? That came out awkwardly. Number 168th of our podcast, our
It
audio-only podcast.
it does stretch the imagination that we've been doing this long.
It boggles the mind. Well, I believe that we are on our number 4 in terms of our video show, which
Yeah.
I'm excited about.
Yeah.
And, and today's guest is Dr. Sanjay Gupta. He is a consultant heart specialist in York, and that is in the United Kingdom. He has a YouTube channel, York Cardiology. He has 122,000 subscribers to his YouTube channel. And from what I understand, he has 259 videos. He is a machine of video production and information dispersal on the intertubes. Dr. Gupta, how are you doing today?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me on your show.
It's great having you on. I'm a big fan of your channel because I had blood pressure, high blood pressure. I went through what you describe on your YouTube channel as the typical what shouldn't happen when you have high blood pressure. I went to see my doctor. They took my blood pressure in the office several times, gave me some pills. The pills didn't work. They gave me some more pills. Those pills didn't work. And then I decided maybe I should do some lifestyle changes. About 18 pounds. And now I am pillless, I guess. And my blood pressure ranks in the 120/80 range.
Wow, perfect. That's the way it should.
And part of that is due to your channel. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for watching.
Oh, yeah. You want to talk about your practice and your medical training?
Yeah, sure. At the moment, I'm a cardiologist, a consultant cardiologist in York. I've been a consultant now 10 years. Prior to this, I trained in the University of London. So I qualified in 1995. I went into medicine in 1990, so I'm nearing my 30th year in medicine, 5 of which were as a student. And then I sort of did my training in the UK. I then went to America for a year, and I lived in Boston, which was the happiest time of my life. And then I came back and got the post, and I've been in York ever since.
What kind of people, what kind of patients do you see in York?
Well, the reality is that the majority of patients we see have a very typical kind of configuration. They're middle-aged, they have the middle-age spread, they don't sleep well, they're stressed, they eat badly, and then they keep coming. The one thing I noticed is no one got better for very long. They would get better, and then they would go, and then I'd see the same person a year down the line or 2 years down the line. And so you kept seeing the same patients, and you thought, well, what's going on here? You just, of course, in the short term, they look like you've made them better and they're out of the door, but they keep coming back, and they keep coming back with different things, which is really interesting. And so that got me started on this idea that actually, what am I doing? What am I doing for these people? Am I actually making anyone better, or am I just sort of
Enabling bad behavior.
Making everything look good. It's like applying a layer of makeup, really. Someone comes in and they say, I look a little bit hideous, and I would apply a layer of makeup, and they would come back after a couple of years, and again, it's the same thing. So that got me thinking, and that got me started on this idea that I wanted to do something which was different to what I was doing. Reach out to people and say, look, despite everything out there, the reality is we're not making a huge difference with the current way that we practice.
When you talk to other cardiologists and you say those kind of things to them, what are their responses?
I mean, I think the reality is that the majority of people, when they have the time to look at the bigger picture, realize that. but you have to have the time to look at the bigger picture. Otherwise, you're so involved in your day-to-day kind of thing where that's what it is. That's what we do. For a lot of people, that idea of behavior change is very difficult. Behavior change is one of the. There is no doubt that the four things that are missing now in modern day medicine work better than anything else out there. And those four things are empathy. So just having the time to sit with a patient and saying, look, I understand you, because empathy breeds engagement. If your patient doesn't know who you are, if they can't talk to you, if they can't open up to you, you're not going to win. They have to trust you. And that comes from engagement. That comes from you being able to demonstrate that you care about them, that you care about their problems, that you genuinely want to help. So I think empathy, engagement, education, and this idea that you can actually talk to someone and get them to see the bigger picture, like you see it. And finally, empowerment. Those things are missing. And the reason they're missing is because the whole kind of philosophy of medicine is, if we can master symptoms and get them out of the door, we've done our bit. Everything else takes time. It's not inherently profitable, except for the patient, if the patient decided to take your advice on board. And therefore, it takes a lot of time to do that. It takes a lot of time to cultivate that. Once you stop doing that, you very quickly fall, you lose your skills with that kind of thing. You become this kind of box-ticking person who says, okay, well, you've got blood pressure, these tablets work, come back in 6 months. It doesn't work from my perspective. Anyway, so the other thing is, there is so much emphasis now on numbers. There's so much emphasis on trying to meet targets, etc. That the new doctors who are being trained, they're being trained by the people who are practicing this way. Because they're being trained by the people who practice this way, how do they get any insight into being able to think for themselves? It's a minority of doctors who have that time, because that's what they've been taught. They've been taught, for example, in your case, a blood pressure of this value is high, and we need to be really aggressive because this person could have a stroke, and that's what we've got to do. And so the ability to have an open mind, the ability to think out of the box, the ability to see that patient in front of you as an individual is missing now. And one thing I think is really missing is humanity in medicine. This idea that actually, because the truth is, at this point in time, you can train a robot, you can train a monkey to do what we do. If it is just about taking a number, putting it in a computer, saying, okay, this is what medicine you need to give them, anyone can do that.
Yeah.
But the idea of looking at a 85-year-old or 90-year-old who is sitting there and saying, look, I'm miserable and I have no quality of life, and I'm taking 30 tablets already. The ability to listen to that person and then say to them, well, actually, what am I doing by controlling this blood pressure? Am I making myself feel better? Am I actually going to do something for this 85-year-old? Am I going to make them live longer? Am I really going to prevent this person from having a stroke? The reality is we're not. It's not going to happen. We may like to convince ourselves. It's like taking a 120-year-old. If a 120-year-old comes in with a heart attack, the first thing people will say, oh, you need to go on aspirin, you need to go on statins, you need to go on the... Why? Well, what is the reason? What is the idea behind this? Well, the idea is, we can make you live longer. At some point, you have to turn around and say, I cannot make people live longer. What I can, however, do is try and understand from them whether their quality of life is okay or not. And if the quality of life is acceptable, and that has to be measured by the patient's yardstick, not mine. If the patient says, look, my quality of life is miserable because I'm having tablets, my role should be, let's try and get them off tablets. Let's stop worrying about my agenda and let's take the patient's agenda on board.
Well, I would imagine there's a lot of times where that is the patient's agenda. They just want a quick fix so they can get back to doing what they were doing, and that's what they want. They want a pill that just makes it go away.
Absolutely. This is what happens. The whole kind of system is geared towards, quick fix and get back to work and work really hard, and you've got to do this, so no one has the time. No one has the time. But to my mind, you see, the important thing is this, that actually when you start looking at these people, you have to say, what am I trying to do? Am I just trying to make them live longer at any cost? Or am I actually improving their quality of life? And are they really happy with their quality of life? And most of these people aren't happy with their quality of life. They just do this because they're workers in a system designed to breed workers.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start talking to them and saying, okay, well, when was the last time you took a holiday? When was the last time you did? Those are the things that matter. And for someone to turn around and say, okay, well, I don't know whether I'm going to make you live longer, because I don't. And neither will the patient, whether he has lived longer as a result of my efforts or whether he's going to live longer anyway, right? Any tablet you give someone, which is purporting to prolong life, you're taking with a leap of faith, because you don't know whether it's going to make you live longer or not. And how do you know how long you're going to live? You can only measure something that is finite. In terms of length of life, by the time you can measure that, you're dead. And therefore, how do you know whether something that you are taking is going to make you live longer? Sure. However, quality of life is far more interesting. Quality of life is something you can measure. Quality of life is something you can control as a patient. And the reality is, not only does working on your quality of life make what you have, make that tangible thing that you actually have better for you, but you probably live longer as well.
How about you talk about blood pressure and how people can respond, their bodies can respond differently to different blood pressures? For example, my girlfriend might be healthy with a blood pressure of 130 over a certain number, while I may be unhealthy at that number. You want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think again, very interesting. We are 8 billion people. How does one number that someone has decided who has never even met us define the whole population? And the most amazing thing is that that number changes from year to year. So someday it'll be like, a blood pressure of 140 over 80 is high. And then they'll turn around and 2 or 3 years down the line, well, now they're saying blood pressure of 130 over 70 is high, 130 over 80 is high. So that in itself is crazy. The second thing is, well, okay, if you're going to measure everyone by this number, what is the person's number? Because to my mind, your blood pressure changes all day long. When you're stressed, your blood pressure will go up. When you're sleeping, your blood pressure is nice and low. When you're with your loved ones, your blood pressure is nice. When you're angry, your blood pressure goes up. So your blood pressure, there is no one fixed value. So what do you compare with this one value that you've been given? What is it? Who knows? And that has become completely arbitrary because, you can go to a particularly enthusiastic doctor and they can measure your blood pressure the first time round and find it to be 180 over 80 and say, oh, you've got high blood pressure, we're going to treat you. You may go to another doctor and say, oh, well, let's measure it 3 times. And then we'll say, what is the number? What is the number that we're comparing against this gold standard that is set out by this, And so the reality is, and does that actually even mean that number is high for us? Because all we're interested in is whether that number is high for us. It may well be a blood pressure than what is construed as being normal, and that is high for us. You may have a higher blood pressure that is construed as being normal, but that may be completely normal for us. So to my mind, first you have to look at blood pressure and you say, well, why is this important? What is the deal with the blood pressure? And to my mind, there's only 2 reasons why this is important. One, it signifies a problem somewhere else, in which case it's a symptom of something else going on in the body. So if something is unhappy in the body, that manifests as a high number, and therefore that could be relevant. That's important. But then in that setting, it doesn't make sense to treat the number. You want to find out what is the unhappiness causing the number to be high, because otherwise the unhappiness will remain, even though you've just suppressed this scream from the body.
Yeah, if the problem is stress, putting them on cholesterol blockers isn't going to help. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's one reason why the number is important, right? That it's a sign of something else, in which case you find what something else is and treat that, and the number should come down. Or two, the number in itself can in some way do you harm, right?
Right. Talk more about that.
So in that sense, if you say, well, how does the blood pressure, how does this number do us harm? And so you have to say, okay, well, what does blood pressure mean? How does it do harm? Well, it's pressure in a blood vessel, right? That's what they're saying. So the idea is that if you have elevated blood pressures which are high for you, if you follow those patients up for a prolonged period of time and see what happens to them compared to a group who have blood pressures which are not high for them, then you see a higher incidence of things like heart attacks, strokes, kidney disease, etc. So that is the idea. The idea is, okay, if you take a bunch of people with a higher number for them, then there's a likelihood that something bad will happen to them. No one seems to define what the likelihood is. It is not that every single person who's got a high blood pressure number is going to have a stroke, or you'll have people who will survive in both groups. You'll have people who have heart attacks in both groups. You'll have people who have stroke. It's just when you count the numbers at the end, maybe there'll be a higher number. So that's the interesting thing. Now, to my mind, okay, if let's say 10 years down the line, you have a stroke and someone's going to blame it on the fact that you've had high blood pressure, then surely the blood pressure must have been doing something to your body over those 10 years for that then to manifest as an outward demonstration of damage like a stroke, etc. You can't have nothing going on in your body and then suddenly have a stroke, in which case, how can you then justify the fact that that number is the cause you've had the stroke, right? So in terms of blood pressure, the idea is that you have pressure in a blood vessel. If you have excessive amounts of pressure in a blood vessel, then that blood vessel could get damaged. The tiniest, most fragile blood vessels in our bodies are going to be more vulnerable to that damage. So why not look to see whether that person is demonstrating the signs of tiny amounts of damage, which then tells you that whatever their blood pressure is, it's probably high for them.
So how do we find that out? If there's this damage to these very small blood vessels?
Absolutely. So you can visualize the tiny blood vessels in the eyes, so in the retina. So you can look at them, and people with hypertension will get tiny changes, little hemorrhages, etc., in the retina, and you can see that very easily. Number two, the tiny blood vessels also exist in our kidneys, because the kidneys are another area which get damaged with high blood pressure. So as the tiny blood vessels start getting damaged, the kidneys will start leaking more protein, etc., in the urine. So you can simply measure the amount of protein, etc., in the urine to see whether that's increasing. If that is, then you say, okay, yes, there is something going on here. There's something going on in these systems, and that's why it's important that the person's blood pressure is. I treat it. And then thirdly, if you have high blood pressure, then that means that your heart is having to work against a higher pressure. Well, the heart is a muscle. The muscle is having to work against a higher pressure. The muscle will hypertrophy. It will become more muscular. You can easily visualize that on a scan of the heart, and that will tell you. So if you see these kind of things, then you say, okay, I think whatever's going on is high for this person, and I'm going to be aggressive about treating it. If you look at all the data, the people who demonstrate these markers of end organ damage, that's what they're called, end organ damage. If you find these, those are the people who are at a higher risk, and those are the people who benefit from a more aggressive approach. But all those skills have gone out of the window. No one looks in the kidneys. No one looks at the eyes. No one is interested. No one even thinks about it. They see the number and they say, let's just treat it. There is a condition called masked hypertension, in which you can have a blood pressure which is normal, but you can have these changes. And again, that is a group of patients who have high blood pressure. But it's masked. So those are, again, people you want to treat aggressively. And therefore and then the patient understands it too, you see. The patient will understand the need to take this. to take these medications or to be aggressive or to work on their lifestyle, etc. So that's my kind of thought process.
Sure, sure. You want to talk about Dr. Google?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with the internet is a great thing, I think, but there is so much information out there, and a lot of the information, I think, is either very specialized, a lot of medical jargon, or it's written by kind of non-medics, who don't practice medicine on a day-to-day basis, so medical writers. So there is this real paucity of information, which is where you can take what the research tells you, you can translate it into a language that people can understand, and that you put yourself out there as the doctor who's giving it, so that there is a degree of accountability, because otherwise you go onto Google, you look at it, who's written this article, who is this person? Are they accountable? But my idea was that, well, I would put me out there so that people understand that actually, I wouldn't put myself out there unless I truly believed in these things. And certainly as a practicing cardiologist, it gives me a degree of credibility in the fact that actually I do this on a day-to-day basis, and this is how I feel about it. So this is the fund, and a lot of research, again, to my mind, a lot of it has vested interests. The research is being done for completely, a lot of research is not done because you want to answer a valid question. A lot of research is done because you hope to get a positive result, which will in some way either increase sales of something or move you forward or be published in the biggest journal. In fact, it is all a big kind of industry, isn't it? Everything you do the research, which is likely to be positive. If it is, then if you get negative results, it looks bad. The journals aren't interested in publishing that because they want to publish sensational information that's going to be, so it is very difficult. I mean, I think, but yeah, I mean, there is undoubtedly a shortage of good, high quality, time with the doctor. It's impossible, virtually impossible to see the doctor when you need to see them. Who you go and see is completely it's a lottery. What their personality is like and whether you will gel with them and they will give you that time of day to be able to talk things through, that's very difficult. So people have to resort to things like Google, etc. And Google is full of the things that make the biggest waves are, again, the most sensational bits of information.
I have found myself more anxious after consulting Dr. Google than anything.
Sure. Anxiety is a huge problem. Anxiety is huge now. And I think all these things contribute. And I think there is so much in the media, oh, did you know this can happen? Did you know that can happen? You better not do this. You better not do that. And the reality is that all these messages are A, about selling something, to my mind, and B, it's all about trying to improve the health of a population. And that's okay. I understand that because a lot of research is based on population studies. You're studying populations, etc. But what is really missing is that kind of one-on-one, personalized, holistic kind of approach where you take a person on board and you say, look, we are very limited in what we can offer in medicine. The reality is we are. And as far as an individual is concerned, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. I could be talking to you. I do everything well. I could be dead tomorrow. Who knows? So the idea that you get that across to patients and say, look, actually spend some time with your family. Go get some good sleep. Stop working so hard. Not only will your blood pressure improve, but you'll actually have fun doing it, and you'll probably live longer as well.
Good advice. So I asked a couple of my friends on Facebook for questions to ask you. And so I got a couple of questions I'm going to ask you right now. We'll start off with the first. This person asks, frequently, my heart feels like it has slowed down, and then I have trouble breathing. Is this normal?
I don't think it's normal, but I don't think it's I don't think it's something that makes me think, oh my God, there's something really hideous going on. With this kind of patient, of course, if you are feeling symptoms which make you uncomfortable, then it is good to get some objective data to see what's happening. So if he says, look, my heart is slowing down and that makes me feel unwell, then the heart slowing down is relevant. It's causing the patient some problems. So you want to monitor the heart and see, does it really slow down? Is it an objective finding or not? Just because he feels his heart is slowing down, that you want to corroborate that with objective evidence. And if indeed it is slowing down, is it slowing down enough to cause him the symptoms he's complaining of? If it is, then you fix the slow heart rate. Either there's something causing his heart to slow down. Some medications can do it. Sometimes in older people, it can just be the fact that your inherent pacemaker, the one that God gives you when you're born, is getting worn and torn, and that could do it. However, if he said, I feel my pulse slowing down, but I feel completely fine, then I would say, well, don't worry about it, because at the end of the day, if it's not making you feel unwell, why worry about it? Stop measuring your pulse. So in someone like him, I would say, if you're getting symptoms, of course, you want relief from those symptoms. And so get checked out and have a monitor at the very least, a heart monitor, to see what's happening to your heart rate.
And those heart monitors are typically, what, a 24-hour heart
Yeah,
monitor?
and again, here is the problem, because if you go to a doctor, they'll give you a 24-hour monitor. If he's getting symptoms once a week, it's going to be a complete waste of time. He needs to have something that records his heart over maybe 2 weeks, so that at least you catch what's happening. Otherwise, you're none the wiser. What will happen is he'll have it, and then he'll go, and the doctor will say, oh, you're fine. And he'll say, well, they never caught it, so how am I fine? And then he'll go looking, and before you know it, that sparks off a ton of anxiety.
Sure. Here's the second question. How much does cocaine really damage the human heart?
I think cocaine is really dangerous for the heart. Okay. Now, there are lots of things with cocaine. Number one, it causes an intense increase in the heart rate. So it causes a rise in adrenaline, etc. So the heart rate goes up. It also has this effect of causing our blood vessels to go into spasm, to tighten up. That's why you'll see people who are inhaling cocaine, they often get perforated nasal septa and all this kind of stuff, because the blood vessels constrict. So what you then have is you're revving up the heart, and you're constricting the blood vessels, stopping the blood to get to this. And it's also thrombogenic, which means that, it causes the blood to be more clottable. So you introduce that into a blood vessel where the blood isn't moving very much, and the heart is asking for more blood. So three terrible, terrible things. How much does it damage the heart? Well, yeah, you will only, I can't say every single person who does cocaine every time is damaging their heart. I don't know. But in general, I just think that it is incredibly dangerous. The other thing to say is not only can it cause sudden heart attacks, whilst you're doing it because of the vasospasm, etc. But in the long run, all that kind of battering that the vascular system has to take will leave the patient with premature hardening of the blood vessels. So they're always going to be at a higher risk of bad things happening with their heart, because they've already caused irreversible damage to the blood vessels. So short term, really, really dangerous. But in the long term, it leaves you with sequelae that once you're older and wiser, you'll wish you didn't have.
Wow. How about that? That was a great answer. It sounds like a positive feedback loop of horrible.
It is.
So here's the third question. My 9-year-old complains her heart races. Her doctor says not to worry and won't refer her to a cardiologist. Is this a normal childhood complaint, or should I get her to a cardiologist?
I mean, I think it's not uncommon for the heart to race. What you have to try and work out when someone complains of the heart racing is the heart doing something funny? Is the heart just choosing to race off its own accord with no other external kind of stimuli trying to get it to run? So, for example, if you have fever, okay, your body wants more blood to try and fight the infection, etc., and you're hotter, etc. So your heart will obviously go faster. Okay. that is not the heart's fault. If you have thyroid problems, you've got more thyroxine in your blood, the thyroxine will make your heart go faster. That again, the heart is just doing what it's being told to do. It's behaving normally. On the other hand, there will be a group of people in whom the heart will just go fast of its own accord because they have a heart rhythm disturbance. Those are the interesting patients, because in those people, you could, it's important to make that diagnosis that the heart is doing something abnormal electrically. But B, once you've identified it, you can potentially fix it. So how do you distinguish between the two? Well, you do a monitor when the heart is going fast. And then you look at what's happening. If the heart is going in an odd rhythm, that will confirm the diagnosis. So at the very least, I would recommend to this patient that they should at least get some monitoring done. Okay. And the second thing I think as a parent is you want to know that your child is going to be safe. And one of the best things you can do to try and work that out is to get them to do a heart scan to see if the heart is structurally normal. One, children can be born with a congenital problem that is not picked up at the time of birth, etc. And of course, any heart disease, if you have symptoms, heart symptoms, and you have underlying heart disease, be that acquired heart disease or congenital heart disease, your prognosis is somewhat worse than if you have a structurally normal heart. It makes sense. So to know that you have a structurally normal heart by scanning the heart is good information, and in general tells you that it is unlikely that something bad is going to happen. And that can be very reassuring for the parent.
That makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. Do you want to talk about a time that you really helped someone in your practice? Is there a particular incident or a particular patient that comes to mind that you really helped turn themselves around?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can go back to I can talk about the patient who helped me turn me around,
sure,
as opposed to the other way around, because the reality is you don't get to I don't get that kind of. I get lots of messages from people saying thank you, etc., but I can't really get an idea of exactly how much of an impact I've had on them. But I can tell you how things changed for me, and I actually do this talk about, which is called "The Heart Attack That Changed My Life." Yeah, so the good news is I've never had a heart attack, and before this particular heart attack, I'd seen thousands, and it had never fazed me. But on this occasion, there was something very interesting about this heart attack, and the interesting thing was, well, the first thing was it was a friend of mine who had the heart attack. That's not the interesting bit about it, everyone has heart attacks, so just because he's my friend, that shouldn't faze me in the slightest. But this particular chap was a doctor, and he's completely fit and well, and one day he was driving along and just felt a bit odd, and thought, oh gosh, I need to stop. He rang his wife, and said, look, I'm coming home, I think something bad's happening. She went home, had a cardiac arrest, and was found to be having a heart attack. Fortunately, was rushed to hospital and managed to survive. Nothing's completely what you would expect, right? The interesting thing was that we shared lots of common friends. And when this happened, all our common friends came to me and said, look, this has really shocked us. Can you check me out now, so that this doesn't happen to me? I don't want this to happen to me. Can you please check me out? And being a naive, kind of enthusiastic cardiologist, I said, of course, I can do that. I can check you out, and we can sort you out before anything bad happens to you. And so they said, well, how will you check us out? And I said, well, why don't we do this thing called a CT, cardiac CT, where you actually can scan the heart and look at the heart arteries, because heart attacks happen because of a blockage in the heart arteries suddenly developing. So they all said, yes, fine, and I sent them all for these tests, and the results were interesting because I was hoping the results would all show completely beautiful, pristine arteries, or blockages somewhere, right? But the reality is that all of them came back and they had a little bit of something, but nothing which was significant and nothing which was completely pristine. So they then came back to me and said, well, what does this mean now? I've got a little bit of crud in my blood vessels. What does it mean? And everywhere I looked, all the evidence pointed to the fact that the only thing you do with things like bypasses and stents, if you see this, is you make people feel better. You don't make them live longer. So all the evidence from bypasses, stents, etc., was, well, if they're getting symptoms of chest discomfort because the blood can't get through, then you can put a stent in or a bypass, and that will open the blood vessels up, and they won't get those symptoms. But actually, they don't live longer than their time.
I just want you to repeat that for the third time. So, in other words, in terms of longevity, you get a stent, you get a bypass, no effect.
There's no real evidence.
5 years down the line, you're just as likely to die.
Yeah.
Well, that's a little nugget of information right there, doctor.
Yeah. So it is all about trying to all the kind of big heavy duty interventional stuff is all about improving symptoms, not about improving length of life. It's about improving quality of life, not quantity of life. So all my friends came to me and said, well, we don't have any symptoms. So what do we do about this? Can this shorten our lifespan? So that's interesting, right? Because I can't do anything about it to lengthen your lifespan, but can this condition, that this crud in my blood vessels, which is not causing a significant blockage, shorten my lifespan? And the reality is yes. When you look at it, it does. Because what tends to happen is that you get some disease in your blood vessels, okay? The disease will slowly build over time, and you get this tight narrowing. The patient will start walking. When the patient walks, the heart is asking for more blood. The blood can't get through quick enough through the narrowing. So the patient says, oh, I get chest discomfort. So he slows down, and then he goes walking the next day, and he finds exactly the same thing because he's got the tight thing. So he then goes to the doctor. The doctor then does the angiogram and has a look and says, oh, you've got a 99% narrowing in your heart artery. You need an urgent bypass. So he goes and has the bypass, and the patient comes back and says, oh, thank God, that saved my life. There's no evidence it saved his life. Yes, he needed it, and he's much better. But the reality is the thing that saved his life is the warning. The fact that he was getting chest discomfort every day, and he knew that there was something. But what happens to those guys who are fine and then suddenly drop down dead? That can't be the mechanism in those people. Right? So what happens to those people? And the answer is that in those people, what you have is you may have a little bit of something which is not stopping blood from getting through. So the patient has no symptoms because the blood's getting through, but one day a little bit breaks off. The body thinks you've sustained a wound and forms a blood clot there and then, and that blood clot inadvertently blocks the vessel, and that is the heart attack that happens suddenly.
Right.
So now what we've started realizing is that happens because people have these things called vulnerable hot plaques. So some bits in their crud are a little bit sort of more unstable and can break off and can do that. So the problem is that you can stent or bypass the thing that you can see to be the most narrow, but the narrow-most thing has happened over a period of time, and therefore it's a little bit like concrete. So it's not the one that's going to break off and fall and cause the sudden heart attack.
Right.
The ones that are not causing the narrowing, A, you don't see it as a significant narrowing, so you can't act on it. B, the technology is just not good enough at this point in time to identify what is hot and what isn't. So that is why people who have bypasses and stents don't live longer as a consequence, because probably the thing that kills people is not the thing that they were bypassing or stenting anyway. Sure. And so at that point, I had to go to my friends and say, well, that's the thing. That's what it is, So they said, well, what else can we do then? You've told us we've got this thing. You say that you can't do anything about it. What else? And really, when you start looking at what are the kind of things that stop bad things from happening in terms of medicines, perhaps the returns are so incredibly low. So when you look at how many people treat with a drug to make a difference to your life, the numbers are huge. So I know that people use aspirin. So if you've never had a heart attack and you take aspirin, the numbers are 1,667 people. You have to treat 1,667 people with aspirin to make a difference to one person, and that's not even saving their life. It's stopping a small heart attack or something. The best value you get is from statins at this point in time, and even that is, the numbers are really not very good, and they come along with side effects. So here I was having to tell my friends that actually there's nothing you can do. The best thing you can do is maybe try and work on your lifestyle, because if the things that cause this bit of plaque to break off are all things which cause inflammation within the body, like lack of sleep, like bad nutrition with all the kind of rubbish that they put in our foods these days, preservatives, refined foods, all that kind of stuff, lack of sleep, lack of exercise, and stress. By far, stress being the most important thing. So that's what I went back to them and said, look, anything you can do to try and live longer is in your hands.
Yeah.
And that is how it changed me as a doctor, because I started.
That's a great story. Is there an empirical test, a quantifiable test, to see how much inflammation you have in your body?
Well, there are some experimental things. There's something called CRP, high sensitivity CRP, that people measure in experiments, etc. But again, with all these things, the problem with all this is that, yes, you can measure it, and you can treat. Again, it'll become a number. Whatever it is, it becomes a number. And the problem is there any evidence that conclusively that if you treat the number, you make a difference to that individual? And the reality is, you may find, again, just like cholesterol and blood pressure, it becomes a number, and you try and treat the whole population as a whole. But the individual can die for so many different reasons. You can spend all your life concentrating on, I don't want to die of a heart attack, and then die of cancer or die of a brain bleed, etc. So these are the fundamental issues. The reality is, when I go to my patients, I say, in 30 years, the main message I have for you is to live each day as if it were your last. And if you do it long enough, one day you'll be proven right.
That's great, Dr. Gupta. We're heading down to the end of our time. You want to talk about who Bluebell Gupta is?
Oh, Bluebell Gupta is my little Shih Tzu puppy. So she is the best thing that I've ever invested in, and she keeps my blood pressure down, and she keeps my stress levels down, and she is my partner in crime, and we run the company together. So I think I get more viewers. I think I get more subscribers because people fall in love with Bluebell Gupta as opposed to what I have to say. But that's okay. We have a good life together, and it's very interesting actually, because there's a lot of evidence now that suggests that actually, if you have a dog, you tend to do better in your long-term kind of longevity compared to if you don't have a dog. And part of that has always been attributed to this idea of, if you have a dog, exercise is a good thing. Sure, it is. But more importantly, I think what a dog does is it takes away loneliness. And there are a ton of lonely people. And I think loneliness kills a ton of people as well. The stress and the, depression and the mental health and physical health are incredibly aligned. You cannot be physically healthy if you're mentally unhealthy, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And I think a dog like Bluebell Gupta works for both. So she is the miracle cure.
Fantastic. So I'm going to ask our final question that we'd like to ask our guests. Is there a question you wanted us to ask you, but we didn't? Is there a topic you wanted to touch on, but we just didn't get around to it?
No, I think you've, I think you've asked everything. And I think, a lot of what I dish out is very simple stuff. There's nothing complex or anything. It's all kind of things that make common sense to me. And it all boils down to the things. I think bad things happen. I'll tell you what I think. Bad things happen because of 4 reasons. 1, genetics. You can't do anything about genetics. 2, age. you can't do anything about age. 3, luck, and you can't do anything about that. And 4, lifestyle, and that's the only thing to do something about. And so, the most important thing I would say is people should just say, look, I'm going to live my life in moderation. I'm going to stop obsessing over measuring things. I'm going to start spending that time trying to improve my quality of life, and forget about what's going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow is, thinking about tomorrow, but actually just making your life better today. Because that, I think, is the secret to a wholehearted life, which is what we should all aspire to have.
Wow. Well, this has been a great talk, Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, this was all.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Sure. Where can people find you online, sir?
So I have I had 2 websites, but at the moment I've been working very hard on my new website, which is called www.drsanjayguptacardiologist.com. So on that, what I'm trying to do is everything I put online, I do a transcript for, and I put that up there. I link it with patient stories. And so the idea being that you can come to one place, and my idea is to put myself out there so that people know that all the information is coming from me, no one else. I'm not hiring any medical writers or anything like that, so that I can be accountable. So that I'm accountable for the information that I put in. It's not defensive that there's, who is this person, etc. It's this person. This is what he's doing. This is where he is. And most of it is largely geared towards just telling people, this is how you make sense of these numbers in a way that works for you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks so much.
Take care. You're welcome. All the best. Take care.
Bye.